Imagine the cold, the darkness, the howling wind. You are chained. They are leading you to the stake. They are announcing your sentence. You hear the firing squad. In 1 minute, they will shoot you. The drums begin to beat. 3, 2, stop. How would you feel?
This is the story of one of the world's greatest philosophers, whose fate became the embodiment of the main theme of his work, the struggle of the human soul between the abyss of despair and the heights of faith. Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky was born in Moscow on November 11, 1821, to parents Mikhail Andreevich and Maria Fyodorovna. As a child, Dostoevsky was an ordinary boy and did not stand out in any way. His family was poor, but his parents tried to give their children an education. His father taught them Latin, and teachers taught them mathematics, French, and Russian literature. In his memoirs, he called his childhood the best time of his life, saying, "Ever since I can remember, I remember my parents' love for me." The boy's first memory was praying before bed in front of the icons in the living room with guests present.
But then came tragedy. He witnessed the suffering of poor, sick people and was surrounded by images of misery, poverty, and death. Although he describes his earliest memories as happy, the rest of his childhood was terrible, and it was then that his painful sensitivity to the suffering of little people began to form. These early impressions instilled in him a sympathy for the humiliated and insulted, which would later become one of the themes of his work. Suddenly, his mother died of consumption, which shook the 15-year-old boy. It was his personal tragedy. 2 years later, in 1839, his father died. This double blow of early loss left Dostoevsky with a lasting sense of guilt and inner turmoil.
In the 1840s, Dostoevsky lived in St. Petersburg, experiencing poverty and loneliness. After graduating from engineering school, he consciously gave up his career for literature, a step that condemned him to poverty, but gave him freedom, which had been his dream since childhood. His first novel, Poor Folk, 1846, brought him sudden fame, a rare moment of happiness and hope. However, recognition was quickly replaced by alienation and creative crisis. The books that followed Poor Folk were not as well received. He soon became close to the socialists and participated in Petrushevsky's circle, which led to his arrest in 1849. The staged execution became a turning point in his life. Having survived the staged execution, Dostoevsky remained a man who always wrote with a sense of urgency. His characters live as if a shot will be fired at any moment. Therefore, for him, there is nothing more important than the choice between loving or hating, believing or despairing. He writes as if there is no time left. "Life is a gift. Life is happiness," he would later write, recalling those moments. From that moment on, there were no abstract ideas that justified death for him. He was sentenced to 4 years in Omsk and then to military service as a private in Siberia. He was very lonely. Hard labor and exile in Siberia, 1850 to 1859, deepened his faith and knowledge of the human soul. He saw criminals, suffering, and humility, coming to the conclusion that people are saved not by reason, but by love and repentance. These ideas would form the basis of Notes from the Deadhouse and Crime and Punishment.
His first significant love was Maria Dmitrievna Isayeva, whom he met in Siberia in the early 1850s. Their relationship was tragic from the outset. She was married, ill, and unhappy. After her husband's death, Dostoevsky married her in 1857. This marriage proved to be difficult. Constant quarrels, jealousy, poverty, and Maria's illness. Love here is experienced as a cross and a sacrifice. a motif that would later be embodied in images of suffering women such as Katerina Ivanovna. Dostoevsky himself admitted, "We were bound together painfully, agonizingly." Maria's death in 1864 was another existential catastrophe for him. Almost immediately after that, he experienced a humiliating and destructive passion for Apollinaria Suslova, a young, independent, cold woman. Their relationship, 1861-1863, was filled with humiliation and psychological struggle.
She rejected him, tested him, and caused him pain. It was this experience that formed the basis for the images of fail women, Polina in The Gambler and Nastasia Filipovna in The Idiot. Here, love no longer saves, but destroys, revealing the abyss of human dependence. Dostoevsky found true and rare happiness late in life, in his marriage to Anna Grigoryevna Snitkina, 1867. For the first time, love became a source of support rather than torture. Anna saved him from debt, gambling, and loneliness. "I have found a person who believes in me," he wrote. This union gave him inner peace and the opportunity to create the brothers Karamazov. What remains with a person when everything has been taken away from them? Freedom remains. Terrible, irrational, destructive freedom. Dostoevsky does not love suffering. For him, pain is the path to happiness. He says suffering is inevitable. In the face of pain, a person is free to choose a path, to become embittered or to overcome, and that is how faith appears. Dostoevsky's faith is not provable, not rational, does not guarantee happiness. It is an act of freedom, an act of love. He said of love, "Love is not 'I feel good,' but 'I am ready to carry you.'"
Early exposure to poverty and humiliation shaped Dostoevsky's central idea of the moral absolute of the individual. For him, every person is infinitely valuable, regardless of their downfall or crimes. Hence his radical humanism. To humiliate a person is to kill the image of God in them. Unlike the Enlightenment belief in reason, Dostoevsky understood early on that suffering cannot be eliminated by social reforms. It is rooted in human freedom itself. His experience of hard labor and staged execution gave rise to his key idea: life is above any idea. That is why he so fiercely argues against rationalism and utopian socialism.
In Notes from Underground, he argues that people would rather choose pain and chaos than formulaic happiness. Dostoevsky wrote Notes from Underground as a polemic against 19th century utopian socialism and rationalism, which claimed that if society were organized correctly and human interests satisfied, people would become virtuous and happy. Against this, Dostoevsky puts forward the figure of the underground man, embittered, suffering, contradictory, but free. The underground man asserts, man needs only one thing: independent will, whatever this independence may cost and whatever it may lead to. Dostoevsky's most shocking statement is that a person may prefer suffering to happiness if happiness is imposed from outside. Suffering is the only reason for consciousness. Suffering here is not a goal, but proof that a person is not a mechanism.
Through suffering, a person feels alive, unique, and unpredictable. This idea stems directly from the author's biography. The staged execution, hard labor, humiliation, poverty, all this showed Dostoevsky that a person cannot be reduced to social conditions. He saw how people in inhuman circumstances retain their freedom of spirit,
while reasonable ideas justify violence. The underground man is Dostoevsky himself after his break with utopianism. A man who understood that to deprive a person of the right to make mistakes is to deprive him of his humanity.
For Dostoevsky, freedom is irrational, tragic, and dangerous. But without it, a person ceases to be human. His romantic sufferings, from his marriage to Isayeva to his humiliating dependence on Suslova, become his teaching about love as a trial rather than harmony. Love reveals a person to the fullest, exposing their thirst for power, self-destruction, and need for sacrifice. Beauty will save the world. That is why his female characters almost always suffer. Love either saves through sacrifice, Sonia Marmeladova, or destroys through pride, Nastasia Filipovna. Dostoevsky believed that true love is always connected with self-sacrifice and suffering. It requires the renunciation of selfishness, not its satisfaction. In The Brothers Karamazov, the elder Zosima puts it very clearly. To love a person means to see him as God intended him to be, not as sin has made him. Dostoevsky rejected love without responsibility. He wrote, "Active love is a terrible and difficult thing. It is not a feeling, but a daily feat. Unlike the romantic ideal, love for him requires patience, forgiveness, and humility." Passion, in Dostoevsky, is almost always fatal. It is associated with the desire to possess and humiliate, as in Dmitry Karamazov or Rogozhin. Finally, later, family happiness and religious deepening lead him to the main idea: salvation through suffering and faith. It was not an abstract dogma for him. He came to it through humiliation, fear of death, hard labor, illness, and love. That is why suffering is never romanticized in his works, but is always understood as a possible path to transformation. Suffering is not justified, but through it, a person can be transformed. In The Brothers Karamazov, this is expressed as the sum total of life. Freedom without love leads to destruction, and faith without freedom leads to violence. Truth in Dostoevsky is always tragic, but it is in this tragedy that he sees the highest form of human dignity. Man cannot be happy according to the order of the world. Man is born for happiness, but happiness is achieved through suffering. Here, suffering is not a goal or a value, but a condition for the depth of human experience. Dostoevsky asserts that suffering awakens a person and destroys the illusion of self-sufficiency. In Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov admits, "I did not kill the old woman. I killed myself." Faith in Dostoevsky is not proven by reason, it is chosen. This choice becomes possible precisely through the extreme experience of suffering. In The Brothers Karamazov, Alyosha says, "I believe not because I understand, but because I love." This is in direct opposition to Ivan's rationalism. Having experienced death face to face, Dostoevsky understood that at the moment of extremity, a person either despairs or believes. In Suffering Love, Dostoevsky sees the image of Christ. For him, Christ is God suffering with man. If it were proven to me that Christ is not the truth, I would prefer to remain with Christ rather than with the truth. This is the confession of a man who survived hard labor and rejected the truths that justify violence. For Dostoevsky, salvation is not freedom from pain, but the acceptance of responsibility, guilt, and love. Dmitry Karamazov is ready to go to prison as a form of purification. The elder Zosima teaches, accept suffering and atone for yourself with it. Dostoevsky asserts that suffering without faith destroys, and faith without suffering is superficial. Only their combination makes true salvation possible, not external, but internal, where a person, having gone through pain, finds the freedom to love and be responsible for the world.
Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky died on February 9th, 1881, in St. Petersburg. His death was slow, physically painful, and symbolically concluded his entire life, which was full of suffering. The main cause was pulmonary emphysema, complicated by hemorrhaging in the lungs, ruptured blood vessels. The disease had developed over many years. From his youth, Dostoevsky suffered from a severe form of epilepsy and chronic respiratory diseases, and was emotionally and physically exhausted. At the end of January 1881, after severe nervous tension, he began to bleed into his lungs. The doctors knew that it was impossible to save him. He himself was also aware of this. He spent his last days at home, surrounded by his wife, Anya Grigorievna, and his children. He was surprisingly calm, focused, and inwardly composed, as if he were consciously preparing for death. He asked for the gospel to be brought to him and for the passage from Matthew to be read. "Do not hold me back, for thus it is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness." Then he said to his wife, "I know that I will die today." Before his death, he blessed his children, thanked his wife, and asked everyone for forgiveness. His last words were addressed to Anya. "I loved you and never cheated on you, even in my thoughts." His whole life was like a sentence, but he found a drop of faith in it that made his life less unbearable.